Welcome to FemPharma's Facebook Live on sex positivity and sexual confidence. I'm Jerry DiPiano, the CEO of FemPharma Consumer Healthcare and the Mia Vita product line for women. I'm joined by my fabulous guest, Dr. Juliana Hauser. Dr. Juliana Hauser leads conversations about relationships, agency, sexuality, intimacy, and so much more with approachability, professionalism, expertise, and fun. She studied and received her PhD in counseling education from the College of William and Mary. Dr. Juliana is also a thought leader and sexpert, diving deep into the hard to have conversations that we should all be having. Dr. Juliana has spent decades counseling and supporting thousands of individuals, both men and women, individuals and their partners on their paths to discover their sexual agency, relationship intimacy, and a fulfilling sexual connection. Now, the jewel of Dr. Juliana's offering is the Revealed course, and I encourage you to take the time to investigate this on her website. She also certifies others to facilitate the course in 8 countries. So if you want to connect with Dr. J, check out drjuliana.com. But this evening, she is FemPharma's guest. So welcome. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Terry. I'm excited for this conversation.
Well, we met the first time when we were on the podcast with Dr. Vonda Wright, who is another favorite woman and professional and thought leader in the area. And so I'm so excited that you agreed to join us on Facebook Live. You know, one of the things that always, it's always a question that I have for any guest is what inspired you to do the great work? And in your case, inspiring the work of helping others to develop sexual self-confidence and sexual positivity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I love that question. It's funny because I actually started off as a kindergarten teacher. So when people hear that, that's where my education began and where my first job really was in. They're like, how do you go from kindergarten teacher to talking about sexuality and agency like you do? And for me, it's been an interesting journey. I think when I go back to where was the seed planted for me, it was in college. And I went to this really wonderful school in Kentucky that when I was there was 850 students, very small. And so we really had very close relationships, and we had this kind of bubble that we were living in. And what I saw with the group of friends that I made there was that we all came to our relationships and to the experience of college with a lot of variety and different backgrounds. But what we did was we created a group that had these like unspoken rules that you were supposed to show up as authentically. Your background didn't matter, as you got to claim your own path, and you got to say what you wanted and needed and what you're experiencing without judgment, without pressure to do it in one way. And there was no one right way to do things. And I didn't realize what a gift it was. I thought that was just what happened in college. And I realized in the years later that changed me. It wasn't just so much the conversations about sex that were happening, which was fun and interesting and new for me, but it was that I was in an environment where I could be authentic and I was asked to be authentic. And that changed what I thought of myself. It changed how I connected with other people. And when I left that environment and saw, oh gosh, not everybody is like that, then I found that I needed that in an environment to feel safe, to really explore who I am. And that changed a lot for me. And when later, many years and many other kind of career maneuvers back, when I went to Women Mary and really started focusing on sexuality, I realized it needed to be within that topic. I wanted to teach that skill set and create that environment in the topic of sexuality. Because if you can understand agency, if you can show up authentically as a sexual being to yourself and to other people, because sexuality is so difficult, because it's fluid and ever changing, because it is something that everyone has an opinion on. And it's rarely the opinion that you're doing it right. or you have enough of it, or those kinds of things. If you can figure out those skills within such a convoluted topic, then you can do that in other parts of your life, like your career, your relationships, your friendship. And that's a game changer.
When we discuss agency, so for those of us or for those that are listening in that aren't familiar with the term agency, perhaps you could just spend a couple minutes describing, or a minute or two, discussing agency.
Yes, and I could talk for 2 hours, so I appreciate that, the time frame of it. So this is a word that is becoming pretty common. You're hearing it a lot more often in the past year or so, but it's been something I've been working on for 20 years. I look at it in one sentence at first, which is agency is a noun, it's a verb, it's a concept, and it's a skill. And I'll talk mainly about why it is a skill. And this is my favorite part to teach people. But the warning is this is going to sound very obvious. It's going to sound like this is not rocket science. And it actually, it's simple, but it's not easy. So here are the 5 steps that I believe are pivotal in understanding what agency is. First is that you know there's a decision to be made. Second is that you feel confident that you can make a good decision, a wise decision for you with purpose and intention. Third is you make the decision. You just do it. You make an action. You decide on what you're going to be doing. Fourth is that you live with the consequences of those decisions, the intended and the unintended consequences of what you've decided. And then last, fifth, is that you look at what meaning do you make of all those 4 things that happen. So in those 5 things, there's 2 things that have to happen on in between those. One is to do the steps 1 through 5, you have to know who you are. You have to really be tuned into the truth of you so that when you're making decisions and having confidence and living with the consequences, you're doing it authentically and truthfully. The other thing is, and this happens between stage 3 and 4 the most, and this is the part that when I say it's the tough part of agency that can take a bit to grapple with, is you have to have a tolerance for ambiguity. To be an agency, you have to, like when you make a decision, you have to, after you make the decision, the millisecond after to however long it takes for consequences to come to bear, you have to know you're going to be okay. You have to know that you can be agile and you can react in a favorable way, or at least in a non-destructive way to how things go afterwards. And this is typically where I meet people as a therapist when things have gone awry, when you have thought of 1 through 5 and you didn't think of the 6th thing that's going to happen. And the tolerance for ambiguity is a skill that we're not taught, just like we're not taught about agency. So you put all of those things together and you are able to be a person who is walking around authentically, who is feeling good. When people have their agency activated, the feeling that they say to me over and over again is, I feel really good. And I think we can all tune into a time in our life when we made a decision. We may not have thought through all those steps, but we're like, that, I felt really good about it. And even if it went to pot afterwards or it went fantastically, that wasn't the point. The point was I found my voice, I made a decision, and I knew I was going to be okay through it. And that changes a lot for people too.
I just had that experience the other day.
Oh,
It was
oh.
the right decision, but I made it confidently in any event. So how do we, when we talk about agency through the lens of sexual self-confidence, how do you modify through the lens of sexual self-confidence? Or does it all begin and end with sexual self-confidence and our sexual identity and the way we think about ourselves as sexual beings?
Yeah, I appreciate the complexity of that question. And my first answer to that is, I mean, I believe that our sexuality is our essence. So everything is related to sexuality, but that's just not what we're taught. That's not the common vernacular and understanding of sexuality. So that statement, especially when I started making it, was people like, what are you like? Because there people are thinking I'm talking about sex acts or sexual orientation. Those things are a very important part of your sexuality, but it's not everything. That's not a holistic way of looking at your sexuality. So when you're looking at agency within sexuality, using the caveat that I'm defining sexuality holistically, that it's the truth and the purest and the most deep sense of your soul, then looking at agency in this topic really matters, because one, as we said, we're wanting to connect with people. We want to connect with people authentically, whether it's in a platonic relationship, a work relationship, a family relationship, or sexually. And for a lot of people, if you're connecting with someone sexually, it is a very vulnerable place to be. Not for everybody. For some people, that's the least place that's vulnerable, but having an emotional information, a conversation would be the hardest. But in a lot of places, when people are showing up and connecting sexually, you are wanting to be an agency so that during and after the connection, you're not feeling harm. You're not doing harm to the person or people that you're doing this sexual connection with, and that everything feels like you are tuning into what I call them yucks and yums, and that you're leaving the connection with being fully actuated, that you are really consenting enthusiastically, and you are kindly declining from the things that you're not wanting to be doing sexually.
Can you give us an example without obviously sharing any confidential information or breaking any confidences from your patients? Is it possible for you to share some examples with the listeners?
Yes, I have through the years collected from clients stories that they gave me consent for. So yes, I have ones that they're okay with me sharing. In thinking of people who are someone who's female identified having a sexual relationship with someone who's male identified, there's a common story that I've heard, especially in giving oral sex. And so often what I'll hear from women, especially the first few times that they have experienced this, that when we go through the steps of agency in the context of those experiences, that I'll often hear things like, before I knew it, I was doing this. I don't ever remember saying yes. I don't necessarily ever remember being asked. All I know is I wanted him to like me, and that felt great, that I was getting attention. I don't think that it was non-consensual, but I also didn't say yes to this. So what does this mean? And afterwards, nothing changed in our relationship. It didn't feel good. It didn't get me the social currency I thought it was going to. And that felt really terrible. And so they look back on an experience like that wasn't positive, that wasn't affirming, and that they didn't feel their agency was activated. They also sit there and often will have a time of grieving of, where was I? If I wasn't wanting to do this, how did I not find my voice to say no? Why was wanting him to like me more important and overriding that I didn't know what I was doing? I didn't want to be doing it. And he didn't really seem to care. And I don't use this story to demonize men, just using an example that I've heard from a lot of women. And going back to those stories, when it's been 20 years or if it's been a week, what's really important is to have self-compassion for when you were in experience that you didn't have your agency activated because you didn't know. And going back and finding where you could have had change in that, going back, what did that young lady need? What did that woman need to know? What could she have said? And then taking that information, moving forward to where you are now. And it's healing, it's self-compassion, it is having a perspective and a context for it. And then it's using that to really build your confidence in other sexual situations moving forward. And I want to give an example of sexual agency activated. So I had this exercise that is a 4-quadrant exercise that you fill in with a list of sex acts. You put a sex act in one of these 4 quadrants. And the 4 quadrants are things that I have done that I would like to do again, things that I have done sexually that I don't think I want to do again, things that I haven't done that I think I want to try, things that I haven't done that seem like a no for me at this point. When people go through this, and I often will have couples go through this, all genders, and it's a really profound experience to make a decision when you're not in a sexual situation of, do I want to do the sex act or do I not? Is this a yuck or is this a yum for me? That's one act. That's one way that agency is activated. Because a lot of times people will look at it like, I don't know. First of all, I don't even know what this is. Like, what is this sex act? What's this word mean to begin with? And then I'm not sure if I want it. It depends. But what do you do with that depends and that nuance? It depends on if it's this person, or it depends on how I'm feeling. And how do I navigate consent when it's not even in the moment? So those are interesting places that you can activate your agency. But what's also exciting, and what I do with my clients, is that so they go through this quadrant, and let's say they're working with their partner, and they are looking in their own agency of what they've decided they're directing next to their partner who has done the same activity, and they compare and contrast in an environment that's safe, that allows there to be differences, to that really works hard to communicate without being judgmental or shutting someone else down, and then looks at it as an exciting thing to find out what your partner wants and doesn't want, as opposed to like, oh, wow, or what, or this is devastating that we're never going to do this again. But having that information and consent it's sexy, it's powerful, and it's beautiful, and it's actually going to get you a better kind of sex life, to have a whole lot more enthusiastic yeses and enthusiastic nos. And then putting that into practice, communicating with your partner, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. And I find that to be a really powerful way to activate agency.
It sounds as though this should be part of sex education at a fairly early age. We are timid to have these conversations with young men and women, but it's such an important part of figuring out the yucks and the yums and what you're willing to do and what feels good and what is consensual. We know that there are issues that affect young men and young women, which gives them great discomfort. And it has been the subject of what we now know as Title IX issues. And I don't want to go down that path, but it would be helpful if you had figured out at an early age. So do you see that evolving?
I do. I actually used to do Title IX talks about consent and coercion, and I found it so powerful. And I often got the feedback, I sure wish I'd had this when I was younger. And I was doing this at the college age. So I think it's never too late. And it's often never too early to be parenting with consent in mind, that you are a parent who teaches your children, your young children, consent, and doing age appropriate teaching along the way. And always checking in, and it should be in both ways. You should always be looking at an elevated way, that are you somebody that knows how to communicate consent to somebody else, and are you somebody who seeks consent? And that's not a gendered thing. That should be for all genders, and everyone is equally responsible for both of those things. But you're right, we're not taught it. In a lot of ways, it's better. I mean, it's certainly getting better, but I also think it's still a hot topic that brings up a lot of emotions for people. And I wish it was something that the emotion was curiosity instead of divisiveness.
I must say that I agree with you, having been involved with a lot of colleges and universities, and having the topic raised more than once. I can honestly say that it's something that we do need to start at a younger age, and in an appropriate way. Correct. You refer to agency as a superpower, and I'm now appreciating this more. But I want to hear this in your own words. Why is it a superpower?
Mm-hmm. You know, I will also say that agency changed my life, and it saved my life. I find it to be a superpower because it's the, you talk about elevated sexual education, which I really believe needs to happen. And I think agency is the superpower that makes sex education elevated. And I think that when we realize that who we are and what we want and what we need matters, that changes a lot. So much of how people are taught to interact in the world, to show up in the world, and people pleasing, and not creating a fuss, or not taking up space, or that taking up space is too much, or is too audacious, or it's too hard. It's, if you've had consequences of taking up space that were negative, if you've been in relationships where your opinion didn't matter or it was dangerous to give your opinion, it changes you. It changes how the depth of the connections that you can make and the meaningfulness that you can have in the world. And agency allows you to find that again. I have a course that's just on teaching agency. I just did one now. Today was our last day for it. And we read stories about either you can choose a story that agency was activated or agency wasn't activated. I always like end up crying in it. It's so beautiful when someone says, this changed how I show up to people and it feels good. And people are responding well to this. I wish I'd done it earlier, but I'm doing it now. And that the example that you gave, that you did it today and you said that it felt good, and kind of who knows what happens with it or what your details were, but that feeling of feeling good is contagious. It's contagious in your own life, and it's contagious around people around you, which is another thing that feels exciting to me. There's a lot of talk about boundaries, about empowerment. And this is my view. And I never want it to offend people who have expertise in those areas, but this is how I kind of construct how those things work together. Boundaries to me are the beginning level of how you are getting to agency. And boundaries that kind of advance. So if that's maybe like the elementary level, then if you're getting to middle school, you understand that boundaries are about the boundaries that you make for yourself and the rules and agreements you have for how you are in the world and interacting in the world, not looking at boundaries as in your way of keeping people out and rules for other people. Then after that, after you kind of understand the difference of those two as you're moving up in your elevated thinking, then the next thing is empowerment. So in empowerment, you are finding your voice. You are finding your way. It is like, yes, like this feels good to speak up for myself, or yes, this is what I need and this is what I want. And that's beautiful. But there's a limitation to what empowerment is. And empowerment is limited because it's mainly individual. And there's only so far that you can go in your empowerment if it is contained by who you are, and that's and that it isn't dealing with interaction. Where agency gets like the P. So if empowerment is kind of like going to college, the agency in your life is going to get your doctorate. And agency adds boundaries and advanced boundaries and empowerment, but it takes you to doing all of those things, adding the skill of agency into it, and doing it in community with others. So that's why, to me, it's a superpower, because yes, you find your voice. Yes, you know what are your yeses and your nos with boundaries for yourself and for others, but you also do that in relation to others. Not always, not when people are empowered, they're not always doing that in relationship with others. And we need that. We need that in this world right now with peace. We need this in our relationships. And we need to know how to be a fully formed person with opinions and needs and wants next to another person, our spouse, our best friend, our child, and respect their needs and wants and differences, especially when there's in conflict. Great when it happens in ease, but hard when it's in conflict. And then in a larger way, doing this in communities, doing this in countries, doing this in groups of people. When you can be an agency in community, everything changes.
And it is irrespective of how you define your sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. That's the gift of agency, is that it is individual for your wants and your needs, and also isn't threatened by differences of others. If you are an agency, you're not threatened by others and you're not threatening others. You're not marginalizing people and you're not well, you can't prevent people from marginalizing you, but it's a place where you get to be contained and whole and protected, because you're guiding yourself and you're not interacting with others in an emotional reactive state. You're grounded into the essence of who you are. And when you're there, even though you can still hurt and you can still be hurt, you are still able to be who you are and the truth of who you are, whether it's orientation or gender or any differences.
So, how is it that, or how do cultural and social characteristics help to form or shape feelings about sex and sex positivity and sexual self confidence?
Mhm. Yeah, a lot. That's the short answer to it. It affects it greatly. It's interesting, and it depends on what religion we're talking about, what race we're talking about, what culture we're talking about. Even the era makes a big difference. Everything intersects with our sexuality. Everyone has a body, everyone has sexuality, and the details surrounding that are different. It makes an enormous difference how you're experiencing your race against and next to somebody who is a different race and a different culture from you, what your generational knowledge has been, what the cultural knowledge is, what the era is happening, alongside what's happening politically, what is happening in the messages you've received from religion along the way. And also, what permission are you given yourself, and permission that you're given in your smaller communities and families and in the larger communities to dissect what those messages are. One of my favorite activities to do along the lines of the things that have the parts of our lives that have informed what we think sexuality should and shouldn't be is one of the first things I was talking about. Is that we're rarely people talk to me about feeling like, my sexuality is perfect. Like it's great. It's just right. No one does. And it's not just self-selected, but we're taught to always be comparing ourselves to this. Add in race, add in spirituality and religion and culture to it. And we now have a huge list of shoulds and shouldn'ts and do's and don'ts and wrongs and rights. And I'm better than you. And that is scary and weird. And all those things added to it. So one of the things I like to do is this exercise is kind of like cleaning out the closet. No metaphor intended in that it's you're looking at what was I taught? What was I taught by my race, my culture, my religion about self-pleasure? What was I taught about what it meant to be a gay woman? What does it mean what was I taught about the sexuality of a woman in her 70s? Who taught me these things? Where did I get these messages? And then, do I want to keep them or not? So we look at, like, are we going to recycle it and tweak it? Are we going to keep it and this gets to stay in our closet? Or are we donating and trashing it, getting rid of it? And that's a practice of agency, to do your yeses and your nos. But it's also a really deep reflection of, let's be kind to ourselves as to that's why it's complicated to unpack who you are as a sexual being, because you're not in a bubble. You are interacting in a world with media. You're interacting with people who have lots of opinions, and you have a lot of ways that people can tell you what their opinions are, whether you want to hear them or you don't.
And if you're living in a multi-generational household, it can get really complicated.
Yes, it sure can. Yes. Yes.
So just reflecting back on my own upbringing, and I won't get into too much detail here, but just thinking about the multi-generational family in which I was raised, and thinking about, some of the customs and some of the, I would say, proclivities that weren't necessarily proclivities that I would subscribe to, I can definitely attest to how that can really impact one's sexual positivity and sexual confidence.
It does. And it's interesting. And it's not even predictive either. It's interesting to me. Like, there's some people that were raised in a home that it was very open and really communicative and really supportive. And that didn't necessarily mean that that's how they felt in their own sexuality. And then just the reverse, that somebody was, it was a no, you don't talk about it. That's bad. Here's the list of 5 things that makes you a good girl. And if you're not doing it, you are not making the list. But yet then they have a freedom in their sexuality. It's interesting. It's an interesting journey. And it's something that I wish our sex education focused on more.
It would not prevent me, I can tell you, from having this conversation when my daughter was in middle school. So I raised this topic when she was in middle school, not about agency, but about how sex education might be modified so that young women had a better sense of self. I didn't know it was agency at the time, but I'm not sure that we've made a ton of progress, but here you are. So we're
a good fight.
We're hoping you're the game changer here, Juliana.
I hope so. I'm trying. There's an army of us that are doing our best. I'll give you one example too, and my mom actually may be watching. She's one of my favorite fans, and it's interesting because she was, we're talking about generational things. She wasn't raised in a home or in an environment or an era where it was polite to talk about sex and sexuality, and there were lots of unspoken rules in it, and that's in a lot of ways how she was raising my sister and I, because that's what she knew. And I was always viewed as this I was kind of a curious child. I was naked all the time, running around, horrifying my sister, and not even knowing, what I was doing. And my mom and I's journey has been so interesting because, I wanted to talk about it, and I was interested in learning more about sex and sexuality well before I got into it professionally. And like when the first time that she realized that I had been sexually active, she about fainted. And it was, a big talk that we had had, to now she and I have conversations. We can talk, and she can use the word self-pleasure, and we can talk about, she listens and reads and looks at my work. And even if there still may be some discomfort, she understands the value of it and the importance of it. And that has carried on to my children. And it's a beautiful thing that multi-generation can heal, can learn and grow. And it's another example that our sexuality is with us from birth until death. And again, it's never too late to get into this topic. It's never too late to have those conversations with multiple generations, or lateral generations. And in fact, it can be quite beautiful because, again, if you look at your sexuality, it's beyond just having sex acts. Then really what you're doing is you are deepening relationships with people in your life. We just have made sex acts taboo and the headliner.
So we're getting to a point where we need to have some wisdom from you. We've had a lot of wisdom, but if you had the opportunity to share 3 pieces of wisdom with our audience, what would they be? And I'm also getting some questions here, so I want to make sure that we have time for at least a couple of questions from our Facebook followers. So we'll start with your 3 pieces of wisdom.
Okay, great. The first is, and this is something that I had spoken to before, which is, I want everyone to know that what you need and want matters, and that it's worth finding out who you are and what are your yeses and nos inside of sexual connection and outside of it. I really believe that that statement is profound if you sit with it, and also become someone who shows others that what they need and want matters, and that you sit and you listen to their answer, if you ask them. Next would be that I want you to really start listening and sinking in to the concept of agency, that there's an important nuanced difference between being entitled, being empowered, and being an agency. And start listening for the words, start looking for yourself, start looking for people who talk about what you're saying, Jerry, you did today. Look for agency mentors. When someone is talking about how they make a decision and how they live with the consequences of their decisions, ask. Ask, what do you do when things go awry? How do you handle that ambiguity? What meaning do you make of it? And then become mentors for others also, so that we have a ripple effect of people in agency in a larger community. And then I would say, in looking at sexuality, some of my favorite tips in having an elevated sexuality is the final bit of wisdom, and that's that sexuality is fun. It does not have to be this serious thing that we're afraid to talk about. And don't put a value to sexuality being fun. Have it be something that is, meaning like a value as in like it's a bad thing. I want it to be something that why shouldn't our sexuality be a good thing and a fun thing? Why can't it be a connector between us instead of a divider? I also love for people to look at vibrancy in their life as a way to reconnect with their sexuality, and start with things outside of sexual connection so that you can then use that spark as a catalyst inside of sexual connection. And then finally, I love for people to start using the word yucks and yums instead of looking at it as in shoulds and shouldn'ts and feeling like they have to do something, instead of things being enthusiastic, consensual in what they want to do.
Well, I'm going to definitely use yucks and yums, and I'll encourage my friends, and especially my daughter, to use yucks and yums as she thinks about agency and what she's willing to accept and not accept. But we have a question from one of the members of our Facebook following, and it's a confidential question to you. How can couples work on sex confidence together?
Mm-hmm. And what a beautifully stated question. And it's wonderful to first of all, what I hear in that question is that they're a team. And that's a really important part when you are looking to change, whether it's because things are feeling super disconnected or because it's going well and you want things to be different and better. You first need to look at it, you're a team, that you're not against each other. Not one person is right or wrong, but that this is a problem that you are looking at together, and you both would be part of the solution in having that. The other thing is that you need to do your own work. You need to go look at where are you in your own sexual journey. First, you have to understand you have a sexual journey that is separate and apart from each other, and that you have a third part, which is sexual journey that you have together. So do the work, take responsibility for healing what needs to be healed so that your wounds aren't bumping up against your partner's wounds, and learn to have communication. The key to really having good communication is creating safety. So if you want to be sexually confident with your partner, you need to know how to create safety with your partner so that your partner can show up authentically. Your partner can show up and say that what your partner needs and wants or wants to stop doing. And you need to not assume that the way what you need from your partner and how they speak to you, or an environment of safety, is the same thing. And I'm really not speaking physical safety. That is the baseline of what should be happening. I'm talking about the emotional safety, that where somebody feels safe enough to be vulnerable and to connect in a deep way. Then you go to one of the pieces that I gave earlier, which is, I want you to have an attitude of curiosity. So my favorite word my favorite sound besides the sound of somebody having pleasure is huh. I love the sound huh, the word huh. And that's the tone and the vibe of curiosity. So when couples are figuring out who they are sexually and wanting to be confident themselves and with each other, then when something goes awry and it's like, oh, that was a no, or, and sex can be so messy and weird and all those things, it should be like, well, that didn't work. All right, let's go on to the next thing, instead of like, oh, that didn't work, or like, that didn't work. Like those are natural and understandable emotions, but those are divisive when you're trying to look at becoming confident together. But if you have the atmosphere of like, okay, now we know that's a no for us, or that's a yuck for us, let's move on to the next thing. Every bit of information should be confidence building, because you're learning more about yourself and learning more about each other. And having yeses and no shouldn't feel threatening. It should feel inspiring. Those things make a difference. And then you add in, after the you add in fun. There's a lot of fun to be had in the wide range of way to be intimate with somebody emotionally, physically, and sexually.
So there are a couple of other questions that have come in, and one concerns pain during intercourse, and it has really eroded the self-confidence. This a private message. It's eroding the self-confidence of this individual, and I will respond to that because sexual pain is not okay, and there are ways in which to address pain during intercourse. And it may be a physiological issue that involves vaginal or vulvar dryness. There are over-the-counter and prescription products that can be recommended. We obviously have a product called Mia Vita. It's a Mia Vita product line. It is made without hormones, and it can be used if you are having pain during intercourse. It may help things. It can be used on a regular basis to alleviate some of the symptoms of dryness, but that may be one area where you want to investigate to see if you are experiencing something that is physiological that's causing you pain, and address that. And obviously, there are some other issues that might be causing pain, and maybe you want to delve into those, Juliana.
Mhm. Yes, I mean, you answered that beautifully on the medical side of things. And I would add to that also that I have also seen some pretty wonderful things happening with pelvic floor therapists that can make a very big difference in pain during intercourse. But I really love what you said, which is that it's not okay. And there are many ways to hit the issue of pain during intercourse, and it's something that you don't have to suffer through and suffer through alone. A lot of women experience this, and companies like you that are doing so much that it matters. I'm so grateful for your company for it mattering, and for spreading the word that there are ideas and things that you can do. Outside of any kind of medical intervention, the work that I like to do too is just kind of go back and look at sexual trauma, to look at emotional trauma related to sexuality, to look at what people are, what they need for safety in a relationship and safety in what the sex act is, and working through the anxiety that often becomes synergistic in the experience. There really is hope in having relief from that, but it's typically multifaceted in how you go about it.
We have one last question. We're getting close to the end of our broadcast. And the question is, what are the biggest mistakes you can make while practicing agency? And the second part of the question is, how do you begin acting in agency within the relationships you've built without practicing agency? Great
Great.
question.
Yes, it's so great. So the first one about, I'm not sure what the biggest mistake is, but some of the mistakes that can be made when you are practicing agency is one, thinking that you have to do it perfectly, that there are many ways that you can start beginning it, and they don't have to be these big, huge things. You can activate agency in smaller ways and in relationships that are safe, that want you to be an agency next to them. I think also a mistake that we make in beginning with agency is that we can shift pretty. There's a fine balance sometimes between being an agency and being entitled, because often when you start feeling in agency, feels good. And you're like, no one's going to take this good feeling from me. I'm going to be an agency everywhere. And that's not agency, because if you are only thinking of yourself in the process of your decision making only, and not thinking about how you're communicating or relating or the ripple effects amongst others, then you aren't going to get the results you want, because the community or the person that you're interacting with is going to have a difficult time with that. Also, not assuming that everyone wants you to be an agency, because sometimes when you're an agency, it doesn't benefit people that you're in a relationship with. And so they may react poorly to that. And the meaning you make of that, the step 5 of agency, needs to not be, oh, it's bad and dangerous. It's, oh, where does my stuff end and someone else's stuff begin? And it's important to be diligent about really staying with, how am I feeling about agency? Did I activate this fully? And what does this mean next to this person's agency or lack thereof? The second part of the question about how do you begin acting agency in a relationship where there wasn't any, that's a doozy. It's a good one. It's difficult. And that's answer with the second part of what I just said, which is some when you are meeting people, whether it's friendships or a romantic or sexual or familiar relationship, you start making unofficial, if not official, agreements and rules of how we're going to interact. It is difficult unless it's mutually consensual to change our agreements and the way that we're going to interact with each other. If one person's if one person's changing their agency activation and the other one hasn't mutually consented, then there can be a lot of problems. And sometimes what that means is that the relationship ends. And sometimes it means that the couple gets whether it is a mother and daughter, or it is a marriage, that you look at, okay, we're a team. Let's change this together. Let's mutually agree that this isn't working for us, and let's practice, and let's be compassionate as we're practicing this, because this isn't about being perfect. There's no way you are. I've been teaching this and working with this 20 years, and I haven't perfected agency by any means. And there's many times that I'm like, oh, yep, didn't do agency and that. Wish I could go back and say that differently. And I've learned to know what my triggers are. It's a really big thing. Maybe that's another answer for a mistake in agency, is know what your triggers are, because when you're being emotionally reactive, you're not being an agency, and you're not able to activate those steps of agency. So in identifying what my triggers are, I can get out of that quicker, not perfectly and not every single time, but quicker. And I can also repair and recover from anything I've done that's damaging, or a part that I've been damaged by somebody not being an agency too. That makes a big difference.
So I'm going to put in a plug for your courses, and one of those is in agency. Visit Dr. Juliana's website. You'll learn more about ways in which you can enroll in these classes to help you, help your partner, help your family. Dr. Juliana Hauser, it is indeed a pleasure to have you as our guest. And I'm looking forward to the next time. And I'm going to sign up for your course.
Ah, yes, I'm so excited. I can't wait.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of those that tuned in to the Facebook Live. I promise there will be a next one. Dr. Juliana and everyone, please stay well and take care of yourself.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you.